All right, so hey everybody, it's Thursday, the 12th of January, 2023, and this is the fourth meeting of our Emergent Strategy Book Club, hosted by Locksync Gimbal Labs and Friends. So I took one of the to-do items. We try to end every meeting with some next most elegant steps, and one of those that I said I would do is just leave something on this Miro board for people who join or read later. I haven't fully gotten into like summaries of our conversations. This one kind of feels like an impossible task, right? But at least we're recording everything. And so that's what you'll see at the top of the page. And I did make it bigger in scale than our regular notes here. Let's try to just move that back. Yeah. Lock that one down. So just at the top, I'd love feedback if anybody just wants to drop post-it notes about how to improve this, but just a little start here, welcome message, a link to YouTube where there's a playlist of all of the meetings we've had so far. And after each of these meetings, I'll just add to that list our rules, right? Anybody's welcome to participate or just listen. We're going to do our best to meet for only an hour, even though we know that's kind of an impossible goal. But we'll leave the Zoom open after that mark for anybody who wants to keep the conversation going. I do have a hard stop at the top of the hour today to jump over to Twitter Spaces. But if anybody wants to, maybe we can go together. Anybody who wants to join and kind of take the vibes that we're creating here to the Twitter Spaces NFT audience. Breakout rooms will be enabled each time. Let me do that. Just in case you need to go have a side conversation with anybody, feel free to just use breakout rooms for that anytime if it feels urgent. And finally, over here on the right-hand side, everybody is invited if you'd like to facilitate a meeting. So I'm taking this one. Next week, we've got Tavo facilitating both the Wednesday and the Thursday call. Juan the week following, and Nori after that. And these preliminary lists of topics, these are subject to change, okay? So if we realize that we're falling behind or we want to move faster, we could talk about that. We could just change these. In general, just drop a sticky note anywhere on this board that you'd like to suggest a change or something that we need to improve. I'm excited today. Our general difference, I think more people have typically been attending, although this is a great turnout. We've got 10 people here today. Had a little bit more than that yesterday for the Wednesday call, which is just really general book discussion, community building. Whereas these Thursday calls, what we'd like to do is take the bigger picture conversations we're having coming out of this book and keep asking the question, does this book speak in any way to how we might think about tokenomics? And we have a great opportunity to do this today. Two reasons. One is that this short section, pages 41 through 50, actually has some bullet pointed lists that we might choose to look at together that to me had all sorts of insights about tokenomics. And maybe we'll get to that. But maybe we won't, because I want to pick up right where we left off yesterday. Matthias led us through a text rendering protocol. Thanks for getting us started. And we realized that indeed, an hour wasn't enough. We didn't get to go through all of these quotes. And so I'd like to pick up right here in no particular order, just by looking through and reviewing what people added to the board yesterday, and keep this question in mind. Does this book have anything to teach us about building tokenomics systems? You can use the tagging feature. Okay, so if I click on any sticky note and the tag, there's this yellow tokenomics question mark tag that you can add or remove if you'd like to bring it up. I already did that for 2 of these. But Dan, it sounded like you had one that you wanted to direct our attention to right away. Do you mind if we start with you?
No, that's fine. It's the big blue one at the bottom. Relax under pressure. There is no form of freaking out that will make this job less challenging. This kind of harks back a bit to my previous work as a heating engineer and plumber, because sometimes things go wrong, and it can seem well, it can be quite frightening. I mean, an example of that would be every now and then you need to change a water stop valve on a live water main. You can freeze the pipe. The disadvantage of that is if you freeze it below where you're changing it and some water leaks out and runs down the pipe, that can melt enough of the ice plug for it to blow out. So you got water main spraying out at high pressure, getting you very wet and everything else very wet. And that is the last moment that you want to panic. You've got to just take a breath, go, okay, stick the new valve on, tighten it up and turn it off. If you do that, you minimize the problem. So I don't know quite how that applies to tokenomics, but it just struck a chord with me, particularly, as I say, from my past work. So I'll stop there. Anyone else got any comments?
Oh my gosh. I first of all, that I didn't know that freezing was used for such a high stakes situation in plumbing. And it made me think about writing like bad Plutus code, like that feels like a very kind of tenuous way to achieve something really important. I had no idea. So yeah, I feel like there's some metaphor there. But this is, when we talk about tokenomics and incentive models, one theme that I feel like we encounter often is thinking about the real, substantial, long-term value of things that short-termism has built really effective ways of kind of minimizing or dismissing. Relax under pressure, for example, might be dismissed as a quote unquote, by a serious person, somebody who really, dresses up each day and gets a job done and makes the money, right? Like relax under pressure could be dismissed by a serious person as kind of like nonsense, right? Soft nonsense. Right? Oh, that's really nice, but you don't really understand how the world works. The argument I want to make is hey, in the long term, it isn't relaxing better? Isn't there a bottom line benefit to cultivating a culture of relaxing under pressure, right? And this is not some like whatever derogatory term we might want to use, right? Like new agey nonsense, right? This is not that. This has a direct, measurable utility that we are so often tricked into forgetting. And yeah, Juan, I was thinking about you, balance. What do you think?
Thank you, James. Yeah, indeed, I wasn't thinking balance, but it has a lot to do with balance. I was thinking part of the book that says that Billy Water, and actually, indeed, we were telling us about, how he likes water and voting and all that. And in reality, the only way we can manage change is understanding that the only constant that we have is change, and the tokenomics is not far away from that. So we need to really, now everybody is looking for ways to improve in every single way. Talking about finances and investments, and saving whatever anybody has. And now the idea of having a commodity that stays stable is on the table. So I think tokenomics has a lot to do with relax under pressure. I mean, actually the other way around. And yeah, that's a direct relationship with the book as far as adaptation, because we need to adapt to what is coming. I mean, to whatever it is that we have to mold our life or brain or our mindset to. Nothing is constant. That was kind of the thing that called my attention on that. Yep.
Hey, Mr. Morano is in the house. One quick thing that comes to mind is a conversation that I had with Mix. I forget during what session, like everything from the book club to just like live coding and PBL stuff, like all blends in my mind into one. But I was having a conversation with Mix, and he was talking about being able to nest a script inside another script. And what this would allow is for the ability to have this idea that he refers to as proof of work, where right now to create, to mint a token, it's usually sort of do it up front, right? Mint a whole bunch of them. And that has issues in terms of distribution and pressure, but also other things like the possibility of it being defined or seen to be a security. So I think when it comes to not just actually using the token itself, but minting it, bringing it into life, and also just building infrastructure on a whole, I think this particular this mindset would do us good, or just do anyone good in applying it, because again it feels like other people are winning the war, to refer back to that, right? Because all these small battles, they seem to be winning by centralizing. But yeah, just keep calm and build solid stuff.
Keep calm and scatter seeds.
Indeed. Dandelion.
Yeah.
Keep coming, dandelion.
Steve, what do you think?
Well, it's kind of, I'm like this, freaking out, with, a problem, being under pressure. And I'm reminded, like these guys that I was studying music under a few years ago, like they were really good at taking somebody, relatively inexperienced, but with some knowledge, and showing how they cracked, right? They reveal their inexperience, in a kind way, in the context of play, and most of them, at a certain level of growth musically, you play the wrong note, and they'll freak, and they were really good at showing how there is no wrong note. Right? You may play a note that sounds wrong, but if you know what you're doing, you know how to resolve that wrong note in the context of what you were really wanted to be playing. Right. And that, like there are no wrong notes. There's just not knowing how to put a note in the right context for the song, and I think, because we take this slow approach, and we see all around us the pitfalls with regulatory shenanigans and lack of regulatory stuff, we can survive whatever kind of mistakes we might make in building out tokenomics, because we're providing the context for what we're doing before we do shit. And so like there really is no reason to freak out. We're just doing experiments. We're not making anybody spend this shit. We're not saying it's got any particular value, other than the value it has for you. For me, that's a very musical way to approach it.
Go for it, Matthias.
I think that since Steve mentioned regulation and relaxation in the context of all of that, I would like to jump to another quote that James put on the board here, which is from page 7. I don't want to be the owner of this, just a joyful conduit. And I think relaxation also, at least for me, if I'm the owner of something, I'm responsible for that thing. And that comes with a lot of pressure, the opposite in a way of relaxation. And I think ownership often also has to do with winning, not necessarily, but if we talk about owners versus shepherds or other managers of work in a organization, what Harsha put on here, right? When everyone is trying to win, no one really wins. So I see all of those really be applicable to tokenomics, and that, if we all win, nobody takes like full ownership of the thing or like credit, or it's like, hey, let's do it my way, right? Still, having a responsibility, not out of obligation, but in aligning of the greater vision, and focus on winning together. I think that is where relaxation can happen. And granted, it's not all unicorns and rainbows at all times. It's a lot of hard work, especially in the context of, this, I don't want to be the owner of this. Adrienne Mary Brown was talking about emergent strategy work is hard work, right? But I think, and when we talk about tokenomics, we are in a similar space. So I think all of these are great, and they flow into each other in a way that it's really hard to, draw the lines, what goes from one to another, and because it's really fluid, all of this. Back to water, I guess.
Thanks for calling that one out, Matthias. And I was last week, I was trying to find the line that expressed this thought that I've awkwardly expressed a bunch of times, and that was it. I just couldn't find it on the spot. So I made sure to bring it yesterday. I'm thinking also about Nori. He's spoken really well and steadily over these years about the value of us cultivating time away for each other, and without a doubt, I can speak for myself, and I assume for some people here, I have practical concerns that make me very eager to be earning a paycheck from this work. I can't wait. It's been a little bit stressful not having that, but and I couldn't have predicted this outcome 2 years ago. The piece I feel in trusting each other is good enough for now, to put it in a kind of silly way. Like, the paycheck is going to come, but us here, any one of us who needed to disappear for 2 weeks would be welcomed back without question. And I know that already. I don't need to ask that. And that already feels like, okay, can relax a little bit at least, and would love to help other people feel that same level of security, right? The secure enough to go that far, knowing full well that it's not the full journey. So
You know, I don't want to project onto you, James, but I would point out that for myself, I have what I think when I compare myself to people that I know, I have a really high level of resilience because I'm used to working or living without a paycheck. You know, like literally like since 1991, you know, except for short periods of time, there's been no steady money every week. And that's, you know, a lot of people that get to know me, or I throw that idea at them and they will literally freak out just thinking about that, you know, like that just makes them feel pressure just to even imagine that. And you know, I think it's a really valuable thing to know that one can do.
hey, what do you think? Ooh, we're not
think, yeah.
quite getting sound. Oh, he's working on it. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Hopefully, yeah. I'm gonna need to refresh this page because it's having a weird glitch. But yeah, I just realized that perhaps earlier I didn't highlighted a particular point with regards to what Mix was saying. The idea there is that, you know, in him nesting this script inside the script, it actually allows for a real-time ability to mint, and for the individual to mint as opposed to like a company or, you know, a project, whether, you know, NFT or whatever else. So, and to do that, like he and I, you know, stayed behind and just, you know, spoke for, I don't know, maybe like an hour or two about this, and I think it's still on the live stream of that conversation. But he kind of, you know, he went into the technical details of what's required, and you know, there's some sort of hacky stuff that he's done, like taking addresses and truncating them because, you know, the amount of space required uh, you know, cannot be, you know, fit into like a token name for one particular token. So, you know, having it across two and being creative about it. So basically what I mean to say here is that it's a really good idea, or what he's, you know, going after, but right now it's a difficult thing to implement. So he's not, you know, like trying to rush it and, you know, and create something crappy. You know, he's gradually working towards it, and, you know, sharing ideas around it, and, you know, us feeding back and stuff. And so yeah, just the idea of being calm despite all that's going on. And actually, James, you made a really good point about all the what's going on within Gimbal, and you know, and Lockout as well. This idea of living your life like having, you know, figured out all your inputs and expenses and really, like, you know, brought them down to a minimum. It then, you know, affords you the ability to do some really interesting stuff. You know, I can sort of, you know, speak to that, you know, myself, having, you know, fortunately got myself to a point where I'm able to do that and afford myself time to think and really do things which do not have the pressure or sort of desperation factor, which then leads to things which aren't which lack integrity, and you know, are most likely built in a not so good, not so good, in a way that lacks integrity. And the point that Juan and Curtis are talking about in the chat here, I think, is really quite interesting. You know, with respect to us, you know, even during a bear market, being able to do this. And also, like, for example, the people who turned up to the summit, like, one thing for me was like, yo, we're going through a bear market, and you made time and had the money to actually come here. Like, that to me spoke a whole bunch. So through their actions they shall be known. So, from Juan to James, and everyone else who I met there, I valued that and so connected with you on that.
So maybe we have something to think about in tokenomics in feeling going right, kind of substantiating this feeling of trust in each other to the deeper recognition that when you take a break, my work improves. Right? I feel like that's a logical thing that we can show. And I'm really curious if a tokenomics could help with that, right? No, obviously we're all more effective when we're rested and, have enough time to have any imagination at all, for example. That's better for all of us to have that from each other, and that does require taking breaks. And that's a hard thing to do in a fast-moving young industry like this. So I want to keep thinking about that. Let me just move the page over here. And feel free to direct us back to any of these longer quotes. But does anybody see anything in the shorter terms or even the significant words that you feel like maybe have some potential implications to explore for tokenomics? Anything jump out at anybody?
I think that what we pay attention to grows. That's really quite. It's at the bottom middle. Yeah, there. I think that's quite applicable to tokenomics, because if you think of incentives, kind of ties back to that. I don't know whether it's a proverb or just a truity in general, where once metrics help you optimize a particular thing, right? They create a sort of compass and a guiding principle or direction. But then at the same time, the thing that you make a leading metric becomes gamed, and then it loses its value in the process, right? So when it comes to thinking about incentives, I think it's this particular saying, what we pay attention to growth. I think it's very important as we um, look to incentivize and recognize particular actions or contributions, to be aware of that kind of counterintuitive nature to things with that respect. Yeah, and what one said about priorities, planning and executing, in the chat, I think it's quite poignant.
And it excuse me, and it has to do with in life we pay attention to things that become our priorities, and we put it on the line of time, and we schedule it, and we just do it because it's part of what we have to do. We don't think about how much in time, effort, capability, or money we need to do it. We just do it when we really feel that it is a priority. And this is one of the things that this book brings me a lot. Is the reality of being connected to the reality we live, and the fact that we need to really, again, adapt to everything, because the only constant is change. So
Matthias.
For me, interdependence is interesting. It is, I believe, on what was it, page 50 or so. Yeah, 50, right? And that is part of who we are, right? So interdependence and decentralizations are the elements, and the nature of elements, who we are and how we share. And it's interesting because interdependence is also one of the words that stood out to me in starting to read this book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This is the 30-year anniversary edition. It's an interesting read as well. There are some things that I would word differently, but hey, it was 30 years ago. But interdependence there is interesting to me because it ties back to the idea of emergent strategy and who we are. And essentially in this other book, it makes a strong claim for character building over, certain types of personality traits. So it goes more to the core. And it breaks down into interdependence essentially as the highest level of, and to use the emergent strategy vocabulary, and who we are, right? Because level 1 is we're dependent, right? For the example that was provided, we're a toddler, we're a baby, right? We are dependent on our caregivers to survive, right? So it's very easy to see if you don't get that care within hours or at best days, if you don't get the care, we die. And I think very much, at least from my perspective, being born and having spent the first 30 years of my life in Germany, to me, the US is not very the most individualistic country in the world, but also something that independence is a very high value, right? Like I can do it on my own, blah, 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 right? And this is great. I'm not talking it down, right? The capability to be independent is great. And however, it often comes as a price of rejecting others, right? So interdependence here, I misspelled it also, pardon me. So interdependence here essentially takes dependency and independency together and form something better, right? So we have the capability to be independent on our own, but we can create something better with the help of others. And then ideally, not in a selfish way, but in a win-win way, right? Going back to an earlier conversation. So that is very interesting to me because I think we have to do that in tokenomics. Because if we just build something for ourselves, we could very easily, even as a community, as a small community, we could sit here and discuss, okay, how the 12 of us today, we plan a scheme on how we get rich on gimbal tokens, right? Might be a persuasive thought, because, it's not everyone has, years and years of experience of living without a paycheck, right? So it might be tempting, but I think as we've seen, and I think this is also, at least this is why the Cardano space has attracted me. It seems something from a higher ethical moral ground, the work that we're doing. And that speaks very much to interdependence. And I think that we are dependent on having interdependence of one of our values in doing our work. I hope some of that made sense because I didn't have a lot of sleep.
It goes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just talked over somebody. Go ahead.
Well, I just, I think it is interesting hearing from Europeans about this, right? You know, and I don't know like how many Americans are here, and like me and James and Curtis. You know, like we've got left or right, and compromise doesn't exist anymore, right? Really, since the 80s. But in pretty much all of the European countries, there's no simple majority, right? Majorities happen in your legislative bodies through several groups willing to compromise to work together to form a government. You know, and that's a really fascinating thing. And I think, you know, we kind of see that in catalysts in these fledgling attempts at governance.
A or Dan, you want to jump in?
I'll jump back in quickly. Yeah, the interdependence thing for me, I'm just going to address what Steve said about European. The problem we have in the UK is we are much more like America. We are very much left or right. We basically have two political parties, neither of which seem to do a very good job. The guys in the middle don't get they don't get heard. They've got very good views, but they don't get heard because they're not extremists. If you ever look at any organization, it's always the people with the extreme views who jump up and down and shout the loudest and get heard. The moderate man in the middle, who probably has the best idea, rarely gets heard, and that's something that I like about this small community we have at the moment, that everybody's heard. So sorry, yeah, that's my bit for now.
The sound's not coming through.
How about now? Okay, awesome, cool. Yeah, I'm aware that we're coming close to the close with the last 10 minutes dedicated to the elegant next steps, if I remember that correctly. Now, yeah, so culture is a really important thing. It kind of goes back to the point which I made yesterday. Like, it's culture and context is super important, right? And I went on this whole tirade about how the incumbent majority Western belief sets are basically being cargo culted, into crypto via KYC into AML, et cetera, because it's an opinionated framework which says you can talk to that person, you cannot, do business with that person, as and so on, and that's defined by our enemies, right? Our meaning from a Western perspective. So that's something which we really need to be conscious about. Been thinking a lot about diplomacy and doing some work, towards that, and really sort of engaging from a government standpoint to address stuff within that particular context. Yeah, so I just want to sort of, I suppose, kind of, go back to, or to add that on, because obviously Steve and Dan just spoke to that. A quote which I really have loved most of my life is I'm not going to get this right, but it has to do with the lentils, where there's this character, I forget, someone might write it in the chat, but there's a historical character who got asked, he was living in a sort of scrappy state or poor state, and someone just sort of came up to him and said, yo, like, why, you're a brilliant person. If you sort of kowtow to the king, he will give you everything that you want. And this person basically just said, if you learn to live on lentils, you don't have to basically kowtow to the king, right? You don't have to be a slave to those in power, and you can be able to actually have individual thoughts and so on and so forth. So in a way, this speaks to what Matthias was saying earlier. It's this balance between independence and interdependence. And I, for one, recently kind of came to a particular attempt to define what my mission is, and I sort of came to I arrived at I'm intending to utilize what I build to hopefully arrive at a point where the one versus the many, basically, like to create systems where the one is not able to be a tyrant over the many, but then at the same time to create a system where the many are not able to be a mob against the one, right? And I feel right now like that particular second one is of more concern to me than even sort of the first one. I suppose it's kind of like communist versus fascism, and sort of try to create a balance in between there. That's kind of in a way my definition of sovereignty. It's not a single man as an island, but that being the default, with occasional alliances being set in motion to be able to do that. My closing thought has to do with this particular highlighted small is good, on page 41. And what I want to speak to this, or the point I want to speak to here is, again, selfishly bringing it back to my worldview. I recently came to this conclusion that when it comes to code, if I have to scroll, to me that's if I have to scroll, that's a fail in my mind for the most part, right? And this speaks to modularization of code, right? I think you could be able to write code which is succinct enough, in a few lines, which again you can be able to have references which reside in different modules, or sort of different scripts. So I think compartmentalization and modularization is super key and super important, and it opens up a different way of thinking. Oh man, and I've gone on for 4 minutes into the 10 minutes. My apologies, but yeah, I hope that was of value, and yeah, that's it. Thanks for
Really
coming.
good. Well, and I feel like we should just watch what A just shared there at the start of our next book club meeting, and then just keep the conversation going from right there. Tough point to leave off on, but you kind of named it directly there. That for the last 40 minutes of this conversation, I've been having this dialogue in my head between the book we're talking about right now, Emergent Strategy, and the book we read 2 years ago, The Sovereign Individual. And personally, I prefer the worldview of this one. I found it at the time, and I find it more so now. I think the message of the sovereign individual is dangerous. Taken in its completion, it's reasonable. Taken just the parts that sound convenient to the reader, what that book basically tells everybody is, hey, you're so smart, nobody else gets it, and you don't need anybody. And that's why I'm so grateful, Matthias. I didn't notice this the first time I read. Somehow I think I must have felt like I was at the end of a chapter and I just glossed over these words. But the fact that she puts interdependence and decentralization together is mind-boggling, considering like the last few years. We hear the word decentralization all the time, and we think about our autonomy, right? And we gloss over the word organization maybe a little bit sometimes, but right, like this, to put those two together as one and the same. Yeah, you can decentralize, you can make smaller systems, but if you ever forget that you depend on other people, you're wrong. Sorry, right? Like, no, nobody is an island. To me, it's exciting for me to think about the implications of that towards tokenomics. And I want to come back to this word over time too. When I think about incentives, I'm excited about how do you make something that people kind of have an instinct deep down. I know I need other people, but it hasn't been made irresistible yet. I've been anti-nurtured. We kind of talked about this concept without naming that word. So exciting work ahead to start building systems from these terms. Sorry, I couldn't resist sharing for a moment there. In terms of elegant next steps, I opened this meeting. I took this one on. I'm not sure exactly how to summarize these conversations. So if anybody has any ideas, I'd love to hear about that. Is there any next steps that we ought to add to this box? Haven't gotten to this one yet. It didn't feel right to start with this today, but maybe we'll get to that. Something to share, like looking ahead to having something to share with others. But also for the moment, I know that like I love this term, next most elegant steps. It applies to a lot of what I've been thinking about across various collaborations. But I think it's okay still in these early weeks of this book club to not quite have action steps. And I know that we will get to the point of defining some actions that lead us to act on some of these tokenomics ideas in the weeks to come. Harsha, yeah, take last words today. This is great.
So I just want to leave with like a small question. We are speaking about individual entities, right? How do we know what an individual entity, because we only live in interdependent systems, whether it be nature and humans or humans and humans. So how can you say that a system is completely independent?
So yeah, let's ask that question every time we meet. Right? I mean, to me, the only way to achieve it is by actively anti-nurturing. Right? You know, if children understand the interdependence of things, you know, like we can, but we forget. For somehow we make arguments about independence and they sound right to us. But I don't know. I don't know. How can it be that we got here? Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a quick one. One thing actually I do like about the book is that there are segments where which start with defining words. So, like for example, one that I remember is like this, page 83, where interdependence and decentralization, I actually define, like, starting with the definition of things, I find to be quite helpful and useful. And going back to Harsha's point, that's something which I think is an important point to kind of come back to, not to be what's the word, to be pedantic about it, but
Right.
like it's still important to do, and time.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. A lot to pick up on that thought. I'm going to jump over to a Twitter space with some folks I don't really know. If anybody wants to join, I'll be there from the Gimbal Labs Twitter account. Thanks for this. I'm excited about where these conversations are going. Thank you all for being shepherds of this space in these early days. See you real soon. Cheers, everybody.